This Marketecture podcast is sponsored by Adelaide. Remember Where's Waldo? He was 100% viewable, but still awfully hard to find. Your digital ads are like Waldo, viewable, but in a sea of distractions. You need to move beyond viewability. Adelaide helps brands like Mars, Audi, Colgate, and the NBA measure media quality and drive better performance by optimizing campaigns programmatically with attention data. Adelaide's metric, AU, is available on nearly every major DSP and SSP, making it easy to leverage attention metrics. Get a free Waldo was viewable t-shirt at adelaidemetrics.com/Waldo. Welcome to the Marketecture podcast. This is Ari Paparo. We have a special episode this week. So Eric's off, and I'm joined today by Krzysztof Franaszek, who has been in the news quite a bit as the CEO and founder of Adalytics. So I'm really excited about our conversation. Thanks for being here, Krzysztof.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
So quick housekeeping. So we're doing this episode a little bit differently. We're not going to do a news segment because we're recording it early, but we're introducing a new segment after the interview with Krzysztof called Justify Your Existence. And in Justify Your Existence, we're going to talk to young, early ad tech startups and find out why they exist. It should be fun. Okay, so let's just dive right into this. So, Krzysztof, you seem to have come out of nowhere. No one heard of you, and suddenly you're in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. You're public enemy #1 over in Mountain View. Who are you, and what is Adalytics?
Thanks, Ari. Adalytics is a platform that's supposed to give media buyers, brands, and agencies transparency and control over the media supply chain. So we try to democratize kind of sophisticated data science analytics capabilities for different media buyers. And we do this primarily by ingesting log file data from DSPs such as Beeswax. We do work with people who use Beeswax.
All right, love the Beeswax shout out.
We also combine data from measurement tags that we give to media buyers on open web or programmatic or CTV, as well as what we call orthogonal data enrichment. So for example, when media buyers are buying ads on different sites and apps, we try to give them the ability to combine their own data with data they get from their own CRMs, from sales data, from information about the corporate ownership of different publishers. So if someone wants to ask how much of my budget went to DEI kind of objectives, how much of my budget went to the various ESG Scope 3 objectives, how much of my budget may have gone to made for advertising publishers, we try to make answering those questions extremely quick and easy so that even a non-technical, CMO or VP of media can answer those questions very, very quickly and easily.
Okay, that makes sense. So it sounds kind of like a specialized data warehouse, like a data warehouse optimized for advertising questions.
That's exactly right. And we overlay an interface on it. So it shouldn't look like a data warehouse to the end user. It should look like a dashboard where they can ask questions and stuff like that. We're also working on incorporating LLMs so that instead of having to, click around in a dashboard, you can literally just ask, tell me what percentage of my budget went to MFA. LLM converts that into a SQL query, you get an output.
That sounds awesome. So this is a business. You're not a nonprofit or a crusader for the internet, open internet. You're running a business.
That's correct. Yeah. So, we work with brands and agencies, both, we have a few Fortune 500 clients, public sector, government advertisers, et cetera. And our approach is, we try to service those clients, but during our work with them, from time to time, we identify sort of new or emerging issues, potential sources of risk to their media investment, return on investment, or brand safety. And when we encounter those issues, we ask the brand or the client, hey, is this consistent with your expectations? Is this something that you're expecting? And if they tell us it's not, sometimes we go in and do some research. We try to kind of really explore the issue in depth. And there are a few occasions when we do this exercise that we identify that these issues are not just specific to one or two or three of our clients, but they're systemic. They affect many brands, many agencies, etc. And in those situations, what we do is we try to put out sort of public thought leadership in the form of these reports, which is designed not just to help our clients or our brands, but the broader kind of buy-side community, all brands and all agencies. And sometimes when we do that, we also work with with journalists from different news outlets that kind of try to convey that. But to answer your original question, no, we're strictly a business that just happens to have a very active research kind of component.
So I think people want to hear about the research, and I want to really dive into it. And I know to your credit, you've sent me, 100-page detailed PDFs with all the methodology, and my reaction was like, "Hey, let's just get on a podcast. We can explain this." So there have been two blockbuster reports over the last month or so, both targeting actions by YouTube. The first was a allegation that buying YouTube video through Google Ads resulted in ads being shown in bad ad slots, so muted ad slots, non-viewable ad slots, definitely not what I think the buyers expected to be buying. And the second one, which came out just this week in the New York Times, alleged that YouTube was both showing non-children's ads to children and potentially acting in a way that could cause children's data to leak, which would be potentially a violation of COPPA. Did I characterize those two stories accurately?
Yeah, I think so. I think just one kind of key qualification is, we don't assert or even make any statements about, COPPA violations. I'm not a lawyer.
Right, of course.
Legal advice. We just provide observations of what we see in empirical data, but we're not lawyers and we can't give legal advice or comment on COPPA.
Okay, so let's start with the children story. The story. Do you want to give us your quick summary of what you found?
Yeah, sure. So this report that we published in August and the one in June, they're kind of intertwined because all of it started because we were a while back, we were working with one of our clients and we were reviewing, their data from YouTube media buys, from the YouTube investment. And there was just a number of things that we saw there that were kind of like, it raised some question marks. And so we flagged these to the client. We asked them, is this consistent with your expectations for this particular media buy? And they told us, no, these are not consistent. And so then we started kind of digging in more and more deep. And we realized that, that this seemed to be what we call a systemic issue. So it was affecting multiple of our clients. And it also appeared to just, when we visited websites and YouTube, and et cetera, this seemed to affect a lot of different brands and a lot of different agencies. And so what we did is we started to research it even more in depth. And then with this most recent report, the one that we published, there was 2 New York Times articles. The kind of issue at hand was that, brands appear to have some of their YouTube ad campaigns on YouTube delivering on these channels, which are labeled as made for kids, like Choo Choo TV, Disney Junior, Cocomelon, etc. And, some of those brands and agencies, when they were structuring these media buys, they were layering various, kind of targeting capabilities, audience segments, demographics, I think retargeting in some cases. And so these were not contextual ad buys. They were more so, using kind of various forms of kind of user audience segment kind of targeting capabilities. And it was just unclear to us, like, how is it possible that these ads are serving on made for kids channels, given that there's not supposed to be any form of personalized advertising on made for kids channels?
Yeah, that's right. So some background here, and I think Ad Exchanger was really instructive with the explanation that they gave, which was several years ago, YouTube came to an agreement with the FTC that not only would they not use behavioral targeting on children, they would also treat anyone watching made-for-kids content as if they were a child. So that was specifically the policy of YouTube under Susan Wojcicki. So you're saying that adults were behaviorally targeted and then shown adult-oriented ads on children's content.
Yeah, or in some cases, they weren't like using demographic targeting, so they weren't necessarily just targeting adults, but they were targeting specifically like audience segments, like they're targeting, avid investors or AWS cloud architects. Theoretically, there could be a very precocious 10-year-old who's an avid investor. So, kids these days are really smart and ambitious. So, but the other kind of point is, we talk to, the brands and agencies that we work with, and we ask them, how do you view this from the perspective of, return on ad spend or return on media spend, because that's kind of one of our, kind of guiding questions. A lot of brands care about that. And for them, they said, the majority of them, unless you're kind of like a Lego or Mattel type brand, they don't want to be on these made for kids channels. And that's because they don't think it's, those channels can drive a lot of click-through activity, but generally they don't see much conversion activity. People buying a mortgage or a credit card or car after clicking on a Choo Choo TV hosted ad. And secondly, some of the brands, at least, they express concerns about whether that puts themselves into kind of a legal, regulatory, ethical, or reputational bind. There was in, I think, 2018 or 2016, there was a bunch of really major brands like McDonald's, Mars, I think Unilever, a bunch of brands that sell kind of sugary food products or fast food. And those brands signed this public pledge called the CFBAI, the Consumer Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative. And this was basically a self-declared public pledge to, to Congress, to the public, to regulators, to the White House, that they would avoid advertising to children. They wouldn't serve sugary product ads to children. So for them, beyond potential whatever kind of legal considerations, it's just a matter of their brand positioning, and ethics and stuff like that. They don't want to be adjacent to that kind of
right. The whole thing is very touchy. So what was the methodology they used to discover this? Was it log files?
It was two things. So we always do what we call closed source and open source and intelligent sources. Closed sources, we get access to data directly from the media buyer, from, their DV360 or Google Ads or other kind of instances. And we can see, how was this campaign structured? What were the targeting segments? What were the targeting profiles? Was there contextual or just audience-based targeting? Was there retargeting or remarketing being deployed? And then where did the ads serve? And then we can see, when the ads were served on specific channels, there's a way you can check, is a given channel labeled as made for kids equals true or made for kids equals false? So we focused really on the subset of channels where the platform itself was declaring that this channel was made for kids equals true. That's the closed source kind of approach. The open source approach is when we try to identify, is this just affecting our clients or is this a systemic issue? Is we literally just, went to a bunch of these channels and just observed for a little bit of time, which brands, which agencies were having ads served there. And lo and behold, we found, a huge portion of the Fortune 500. I think all 6 media agency holding companies, all of them were having their ads pop up on these made for kids channels. So obviously I can't speak to all those guys because I don't know where they're targeting parameters or intentions. That's the open source component. But we can at least say that this appears to be affecting a lot of people. And that's why we thought this would be in the public interest to kind of raise awareness about this.
And what is the potential issue around data leakage? Because I think you saw that there were potentially pixels or other ad technologies involved on these children's channels.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the thing that we notice is that a lot of times, in the data that we get directly from brands, there's a lot of click-through activity. There's an enrichment for click-through activity on videos that are marked as, for toddlers or for babies or et cetera. And so when, a putative child or viewer of a made for kids video clicks on an ad, they come to the advertiser's website. A lot of advertisers, unless they're like a Lego or a Mattel, they're not really expecting young kids to be visiting their websites. And they don't appear to show, that kind of consent mode. It was like, does your parent, give consent to, for this child's data to be processed, stored, and shared, et cetera. They don't really know or expect the ability to put up that modal. And so the inadvertent consequence of that is that if a toddler accidentally clicked on an ad from a car brand or something on Choo Choo TV, they go to that car brand's website, that car brand doesn't show a consent modal, and they put the user in both first-party audiences like HubSpot, Salesforce, Pardot,
right,
Adobe Audience Manager, and they also put it through like third-party data processors like Facebook Pixel, TikTok Pixel, etc. So part of our report, the question that we asked in the title of the report was, are YouTube advertisers inadvertently harvesting data from millions of children, right?
Yeah.
We could see this pattern appear over and over and over. I think it was like 99% of the brand's ads we saw in these kids' videos, like the 99% of them would not ask for a consent modal from parents, and they would put users in these kind of first-party and third-party audience segments. That was kind of the concern.
So if I was going to boil down what you're saying, right, the first allegation, which seems to have a lot of evidence, is that non-child ads are being shown on child channels. The second allegation is that those ads are getting there because of behavioral targeting, which YouTube says it doesn't do. In both cases, these are adults seeing ads for adult products on child channels. So those are the first two allegations. Am I good so far?
With some qualifying points, yes, that's the high level.
So then the third allegation is that if someone clicks through on those ads, it potentially raises risk for the advertiser because they're not expecting that person to be a child, and they could be executing data collection methods which would not be appropriate for children. However, the fourth piece of this would be, are children seeing adult ads? And is there any allegation is there any evidence to that?
So when you pull reports from a Google Ads or DV360 ad campaign, there's no kind of demographic reporting on, users under the age, I think 13 or 18. Like they show demographic age segments, 18 to 24, 24 to 30, etc. But there's no one for like people under 18. What there is reporting is for people who are unknown. There's like age unknown, gender unknown, etc. And so we do see that sort of unknown segment appearing in some of these demographic reports. Ostensibly or possibly, those could be, these so-called, the children watching this. What was interesting to me is there was a report put out by kind of a British public kind of regulator or a public sector entity in the UK, where they examined the issue of how children interface with the YouTube platform. And what they found was, the majority of children, when they use YouTube, they don't do it through the YouTube Kids app, the dedicated Kids app. They do it through the regular YouTube app or website. And secondly, the majority of them do it in a signed out state. They don't log into Gmail or their parents' Google account. They're signed out, like incognito. So that would be kind of consistent with that.
So if we establish that adult ads are being shown on children's content, and we establish that children may be watching the children's content non-logged in, you can draw the conclusion that some of those ads might be shown to children, and therefore some of those clicks might be children, and then therefore marketers may have a bunch of children's data in their CRM database. I'm just kind of trying to put it all together. So a VP of advertising at Google named Dan Taylor put out a thread on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, supposedly rebutting your study. I want to go through this and rebut his rebut, or talk about his rebut. First of all, Dan, I don't know what's the deal, but you're really not good at threading stuff. So you have 6 facts. It starts out with like, today the New York Times covered a flawed study by Adalytics, the second time they produced faulty research about Google advertising this summer. Here's 6 facts about how we protect kids on YouTube that Adalytics gets completely wrong or ignores. Then it follows with 9 facts, and the 9 facts are out of order. So Dan, come on, man, get your Twitter in order. All right, so we're going to go through these one at a time. Number 1, we don't personalize ads to kids ever, and we treat everyone who watches made-for-kids content as a child, regardless of their age. True or false?
I won't say true or false. I can ask a qualifying question.
Okay.
So my question I would ask to the gentleman is, could they please be very explicit in what is personalized advertising, what is audience-targeted advertising, what is behavioral advertising? I'd like to get some very precise clarity beyond the overlap of these definitions, whether they're distinct, the mechanisms. And secondly, we would like some clarity how it's possible for a campaign that's, 100% targeted using audience segments or retargeting to serve on made-for-kids channels.
Right. So we don't personalize ads to kids. You could parse that as, when we know you are a child, we do not use behavioral targeting on you. So maybe that's true. We don't know. There's no evidence against that. But then the second part, we treat everyone who watches made-for-kids content as a child. Your evidence seems to be strongly rebutting that. So now I'm going to pass number 5 and 4 to go to number 2. It says, number 2, we built YouTube Kids as a dedicated app designed from the ground up to be a safer experience for kids to explore, with tools for parents and caregivers to guide their journey. The YouTube Kids app has never had any personalized ads either. Does any of your research touch on YouTube Kids? Is there any evidence that statement might be questionable?
Like I said earlier, we focused really on the YouTube kind of regular adult app, if you can describe it that way, just because there was prior research to suggest the majority of young children, at least in the UK, when they use YouTube, they're doing it through the regular adult app rather than the kids one.
So Dan may have a point on number 2.
There's 2 kind of additional just interesting points to note. So on the YouTube Kids app, to my knowledge, the ads are not clickable. So a user of the YouTube Kids app, when they get served a video ad, they cannot click through and go to the advertiser's website.
Right, that's great.
On the adult or regular YouTube app, when a video ad is served on a channel that is labeled as made for kids equals true, those ads are clickable. That is kind of where some of this, data leakage that you allude to, could be occurring to. And it's interesting that the mechanism through which it's set up, it's different. The ability to not click or click on these respective environments, even when both of them are ostensibly, made for kids.
Yeah, it sounds like YouTube should be treating made-for-kids content exactly the way they do on the kids app, but they're not. Number 3, once again, this is Dan Taylor speaking. Made-for-kids content has ads, but we restrict the types of products that can be advertised, e.g. no ads for video games or media unsuitable for children, no ads about dating and relationships, no ads for food and beverage. That's interesting. So he's not saying that it's impossible to show a Jeep ad or a finance ad. He's kind of saying that it is possible to see an ad for one of those categories?
So during our research, during the open source phase of the research project, we tracked what sorts of ads were being shown on these Made for Kids channels. We saw ads that some would describe as violent or graphic. There were ads showing a man in a car, it's submerged in a river and he's drowning, being served on a video where it's lullabies to put your baby to sleep.
Oh my God.
There was an ad showing soldiers running with sniper rifles and getting like bombs exploding around them, being served on a video that's like songs for kids.
Right.
So insofar as we think that maybe, it's not conducive to children's mental and developmental well-being to be exposed to such content at a very young age, that raises some concerns. Secondly, we also, for a lot of the brands and products that we saw that were advertising these Made for Kids channels, we went to their websites and we observed, what are the terms of service for those products? To my knowledge, for most credit cards and mortgages, you have to be legally of age, 18 years or older, to buy the product. So it raises the question of, why were insurance brands, credit card brands, banks, etc., having their products advertised in a context where the majority of users might not be legally able to use that product? As a prime example, we looked at Google and YouTube's own ad campaigns. They were running YouTube campaigns promoting, YouTube TV, NFL Sunday Ticket, Google Chrome Enterprise, Google Workspace, a bunch of, I think there was 5 different ad campaigns promoting Google's own products. For at least 3 of them, when we went to the terms of service for, YouTube TV, NFL Sunday Ticket, I think, or one of those other products, it specifically says in the terms of service, you must be 18 years or older to purchase this product. So again, like obviously that's YouTube, NFL, or whatever. It's not graphic, it's not violent for the child to see, but it's raises some questions about the adjacency.
Yeah, this all brings up the general flaw. If you ban one thing, you're probably missing 10 other things. Just like a simple blacklist. Oh, you can't show games for videos or food to kids. That's just not really an effective strategy in a programmatic environment. Okay, number 4 from Dan. Google does not share with advertisers what content or video a person was watching when they click on an ad. That means advertisers never know if a click came from someone watching Made for Kids content, regardless of their age. Okay, I get the point. That means that this data leakage problem, what they're saying is the advertiser has plausible deniability. The click came from a Made for Kids ad, but how would they know? They wouldn't know, so they could treat them sort of as any visitor to their website and do whatever they want. Did that pass your smell test?
Kind of qualifying points. The first one is, we talked to media buyers and we asked them, do you want to have the ability to know, like a kind of a Boolean flag of, a UTM parameter or whatever, request or something that would indicate that the user is coming from child-directed content. And the vast majority of media buyers that we spoke with, they said they would like some kind of communication in the event of an ad click-through that the viewer coming to their website or their app is the viewer of Made for Kids content. That's the first one. The second point is, a lot of brands, particularly the ones we work with, they employ sophisticated kind of bidding or ad optimization strategies. Some of them, for example, use performance max.
Sure.
And so the issue is that if you have an algorithm that is potentially optimizing to click-throughs, and some of those click-throughs, while human, are coming from children or toddlers, you may be effectively optimizing for a KPI that is not very tightly correlated with conversions, with actual business outcomes. You might get a lot of clicks by optimizing for these child-directed, clicks, but you're not going to get a lot of business conversions, right? So that's the second thing is, what is the effect of potentially low quality or altered data sets in terms of how it informs a brand's media investment strategy?
Yeah, I think the general theme I'm hearing of Dan is saying things like, well, we're not breaking the rules, and you're saying, regardless, this is not what advertisers want. So number 5, advertisers with a single click can choose to opt out of Made for Kids content. The opt-out, called content suitable for families, prevents advertisers from having their ads run alongside this content. Adalytics doesn't appear to know this. Ooh, it's getting spicy. So is this a checkbox in Google Ads or in DV360?
Our report specifically describes and talks about that button. There were brands that we work with who have used that button. And even though they have used that exclusion, the content suitable for families, we still observe delivery of their ads on Made for Kids channels. So unless there was a software update that happened very recently, I'd be curious to see how that was possible. Furthermore, we think that Made for Kids content and content suitable for families, both kind of semantically as well as technically, as suggested by the data, are not necessarily one-to-one, right? You can have something that's, totally suitable for a family to watch, but is not directly intended or made for kids, right?
Yeah.
And so, insofar as brands don't want to only be serving on violent MMA YouTube fighting videos, there are some questions about, is this the appropriate descriptor of that? But furthermore, like even if there was this one-click exclusion, let's say it did work, the fact that all 6 agency holding companies are among the biggest, most sophisticated media buyers in the world, all had multiple clients or adult brands served on those Made for Kids videos, that raises some concerns about, how thoroughly was this communicated to them a priori.
Yeah, and also I think the key point, which is that is not say made for kids. It says suitable for families, which is very different. Number 6, cookies did not equal ad personalization. Cookies are permitted under COPPA for statistical reporting, spam and fraud detection, et cetera, et cetera. They're critical to YouTube. I'm paraphrasing. I think that's accurate. The cookies are allowed under COPPA. So did you specifically have an allegation around their misuse of cookies in this case?
I think maybe there was a little bit of a misunderstanding. Our report is 200 plus pages. So
Right.
we very explicitly say that A, there were personalized ads served on Made for Kids channels, and B, there were cookies that, according to Google's own terms of service, are described for advertising purposes. We never allege or make the sequitur that the two are correlated. We never say that these cookies are the ones that are used to power ad personalization. We just say there's 2 distinct sets of observations. We know, for example, that there are other methods of maintaining a persistent user identifier for targeted ads. You could use a request tag. You could use a fingerprint. You could use, IP address, for example. There's many orthogonal mechanisms. This was just 2 separate sets of observations. And we even had an explicit section called caveats and limitations, where we make it very clear that we're not asserting that the cookies were used for ad personalization. So I would encourage any reader or commentator on our research to spend some time perusing the content thoroughly.
Okay. Let's go to point number 7 on Dan's list of the 6 things that Adalytics gets wrong. Though we just received the report, what we've reviewed shows no violations of our commitments to our privacy policies. Given Analytics' last report was debunked by 2 independent organizations, that would be IAS and Double Verify, we do not put much stock in the accuracy of their research. This is just ad hominem at this point. I'm not sure you'd even need to respond. Let's talk about Double Verify and IAS next. So I'm going to skip this one. Number 8. The New York Times, who was given early access to the report, couldn't even verify the bulk of Adalytics' claims. It does not corroborate their accusations, and in fact found the opposite. No violation of COPPA, no personalization of ads to kids, no improper use of cookies. Is that your understanding of what the New York Times did?
I'm not entirely clear on that, but keep in mind also that I believe the blog that you're currently reading was published after the first New York Times article dropped and not after the second one. The second one references studies where I think half a dozen different independent media buyers in the US and in Europe all asserted that they saw evidence of 100% audience-targeted ad campaigns delivering on Made for Kids channels. To my knowledge, there was even a nonprofit in the US who ran a test ad campaign where they would spend $10. 100% of those $10 were using audience segments and targeting avid investors or such, and they still saw delivery of ads on Made for Kids channels. So again,
once again, the crux of the real red line here is adult ads being behavioral targeted on kids content. Advertisers probably don't want that. Most definitely would like to avoid that in many cases. And the content not being suitable for kids. And then separately, the second part of the problem, which is probably there was some exposure to children who were not logged in, who were looking at that content. I'm just going to kind of repeat it so we all kind of boil it down. Number 9, Adalytics report has no substance and tries to make a gotcha when there is none. Okay, fine. Thanks for your opinion there. I want to get your opinion on this. We offered to meet with them weeks ago and heard crickets.
So there was a gentleman who works at Google who emailed me, I think in July. It's at the end of June, or when it's in July. Asked about the GDP research that we put out with the Wall Street Journal. He did not make any references or discussions about the COPPA research that was published recently. Or so not the COPPA, but the Made for Kids research that was published recently. We haven't had any outreach, to the best of my knowledge, about that. Furthermore, in November of last year, there was an outreach attempt from our side to a gentleman, a director of ad quality at Google, because we were seeing major brands having their ads served on pornographic websites through DV360 and Google AdSense, as well as on Iranian websites. To the best of my knowledge, Iran is under comprehensive U.S. Treasury sanctions. We still have not received a response to that outreach attempt, and it's currently August, and that was in November. So we're looking forward to.
These big tech companies are totally non-responsive, and they always love to accuse their critics of not engaging with them.
Just to be clear, of course, healthy dialogue is something that should be encouraged. A good faith dialogue is something that should be encouraged. And ultimately, what we want to do is prioritize what's best for brands and for agencies, right? That's why we ask them all these questions. Is this consistent with your expectations? Why are these controls working the way that you expect them to? And we think that in a way, we're doing something that is beneficial, not just to the buyers, but potentially even to the platforms, because they get kind of informed feedback on what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And so insofar as we can have kind of a healthy, good faith discussion about that in a public forum where everyone can kind of make their own decisions, come to their own conclusions, that's really something that we strive for. Our reports, for example, they are long. We try to have very detailed methodology sections. Sometimes they're 50 pages, methodology. And the idea behind that is that we want anyone, such as yourself, if you so desired, you could independently reproduce this research, these analyses, and come to your own conclusions and make your own determinations of what's consistent with your own media investment strategies. That's something that we do not just on behalf of our existing clients, but the broader buy-side community.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time on this children's report. I want to spend a significantly briefer amount of time on your previous report. In, I guess, July, you published with the Wall Street Journal the evidence that when people were buying YouTube ads, they were actually showing their ads outside of YouTube, and that's fine. That was sort of disclosed, but the issue was that the quality of those placements was significantly hampered versus what people might expect in a true view YouTube scenario. I think the interesting part of this story is the reaction, both Google's sort of non-denial denials and the fact that Google's partners, DoubleVerify and IAS, were pretty vehemently in their support. I kind of want to focus in on that part of it, if that's all right with you.
Sure. 2 points there. So the first one, as you mentioned, the core finding in the research was there are these two types of video ad formats. One is called outstream and one is called instream. In this, the data that we analyzed, we were specifically looking at these so-called in-stream skippable ad placements, which, based on our observations, appear to be serving in outstream muted and in some cases auto-playing environments, which, according to the documentation that the platform itself provides, misdeclaration of outstream as in-stream is a form of invalid traffic, IVT. This is a direct citation from their documentation. And so our core question, was when we talked to media buyers again, we asked them, when you buy an in-stream skippable ad block, do you expect ads to be serving on? And we showed them screenshots and examples of that, and they all told us that no, this is not consistent. So that was kind of the first core issue. There was, of course, other issues. Some of the ads appeared to be partially obscured. Some of them appeared to serve on, foreign publishers that may be under U.S. Treasury sanctions, which introduces compliance problems. And there was also issues of, potentially there being higher view-through rates when an ad is served in a muted outstream video player rather than through an in-stream one. The second point that you raised, we think that it's important, for independent measurement vendors and verification companies to have their own sources of telemetry, their own sources of truth, and etc. So we try to approach our studies in a way where, we corroborate data using orthogonal methods, orthogonal methodologies. We don't rely on just what a platform or a DSP or an ad server tells us. We look at other sources of data, whether that's crawlers, a measurement tag, etc., and we try to cross-reference those, right? And furthermore, one additional kind of point of maybe differentiation for us as a platform, as a company, is we have a very strict policy where we only accept payment, financial resources, from buy-side entities. We do not accept payment from ad tech platforms, ad tech intermediaries, etc., because we think that might create a situation where it's difficult for us to prioritize the best interest of the buy side. And that allows us basically to, when we identify what we call systemic issues or systemic risks to brands' media investments, that we are unencumbered in our ability to A, attribute the specific point of risk, and B, to disseminate public research which can base our findings.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and I think focusing on the buy side certainly helps you be sort of, thorough and unbiased. But I guess that kind of does sort of lead into the question about verification. So after you put out this research, and so in some cases there were screenshots, right, and video plays, like you could actually see these ads in bad spots. So kind of a smoking gun. The size of the fire could be debated, but um, Google first says, Google's response, I'm going to just absolutely boil it down. They said something like, yeah, sure, but we guarantee 90% viewability. That was kind of their response, right? And the reaction from people like me was like, well, we didn't say anything about viewability. That wasn't their claim at all. And we didn't realize that when you said it was TrueView, what you meant was it's TrueView in-stream on YouTube.com and it's 90% viewable everywhere else. So I think that they sort of, in a sense, confirmed some of what you had already said. Is that right?
One of the things our original report in June mentions is the word in-stream and outstream. We mentioned those words 274 times. The initial rebuttal that was put out by the company mentions those two words 0 times.
Exactly. They totally rebutted something that you didn't claim. So that wasn't the best. And then there were issues of quality about muted and whether things are audible, right? And they didn't really address that either. So then, Google has partnerships with the two leading verification companies. I actually just, last week on this podcast has had Lisa on from Schneider from IS. She gave a great conversation. She addressed some of these issues a bit. But they both came out to defend Google. I guess my question would be, I mean, obviously I see why they're doing it, but do they have the data or the evidence to make claims to defend Google in this case? Or because I didn't see any real research from them that defended them.
One kind of qualification question, when you saw the rebuttals posted by those companies, how many times were the words in-stream and outstream mentioned in the rebuttals?
Right.
Furthermore, to answer your original question, to the best of my limited knowledge, the vendors that you mentioned, they source their telemetry through a system called Ads Data Hub. It's a server transfer where data is sent from the platform that's ostensibly being audited to the verification vendors. And obviously, when you're getting data from another source, that precludes the ability for independent measurement, right? So our position is that's why we try to employ orthogonal strategies for data collection so that we can cross-reference of what it is declared data from a DSP or a platform with what is measured data, what is empirical data, right? That's always something that we do for not just for walled garden platforms, but for open web, for CTV, et cetera. And as such, we just think that there's, if you're measuring two different things, quote unquote, or one entity is measuring something and the other one is just receiving kind of measurements from someone else, that obviously can lead to discordance between the final outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these companies have different types of integrations with different platforms. And in some cases, like Lisa was making the point that they scan every single TikTok video in real time. And I was pretty impressed by that. That's cool. That sounds like pretty robust. Versus getting log files, once every hour. It doesn't sound so robust. Okay, so awesome. So what's next? Who are you taking down next? Is it we going to see some new headlines, or are you going to take the rest of the summer off?
We're quite busy now, obviously, servicing our clients' needs and try to help them, optimize their ad campaigns and make sure that everything is going according to what they will. But we are working also on some other kind of systemic issues that we've identified. So we are looking at some other so-called, walled garden platforms. There have been some concerns that we've identified in the data with those. We're also looking at issues of outstream and in-stream video inventory being sold not through YouTube per se, but through other major SSPs. There appears to be some preponderance of that.
Oh, big surprise! Shocked.
Yeah, and also we're looking at some research concerning sort of supply fees. How much are DSPs and how much are SSPs taking in sort of fees. We published some research on that subject matter, I think, a year ago. We now have sort of updated kind of telemetry and insights on that project. And so we're looking to post an update with, sort of a lay of the land of what we're seeing.
All right. That sounds really exciting. We're going to have you back to go through those when they come out. So Krzysztof, thank you so much for being here. This was super informative. We please stay listening because we have our new segment, Justify Your Existence, showing coming right after this, where we find out why a startup believes they could exist in this horrible ad tech ecosystem we've all built and why they're dedicating their lives to that. That should be fun. So, Krzysztof, thanks again.
This is a message from our sponsor. I'd like to introduce you to Publica by IAS, the award-winning CTV ad server trusted by some of the biggest streaming services and smart TV manufacturers globally. Publica helps a growing number of leading AVOD and FAST services to power the programmatic ad break decisioning via products including a unified auction, server-side ad insertion, and a demand-agnostic ad server built from the ground up around streaming. Head to getpublica.com to find out how they help CTV publishers to grow their advertising revenues and provide streaming audiences with linear-like TV ad break experiences.
Welcome to Marketecture's Justify Your Existence, where we ask early-stage ad tech and MarTech startups to tell us why we should care about what they're building. I am joined today by old friend Keith Petri, who many of you probably know. So Keith is the CEO and founder of Locker, and I want to hear what Locker does, even though Keith's told me 500 times. So let's start with the basics. How big is Locker in terms of employees? Where are you based, and how much have you fundraised?
We are 8 employees. We were founded during COVID, and so we are a quintessential pandemic startup that is fully distributed and remote, and we have raised to date just over $2.5 million.
So, break it down for me. What does Locker actually do? I don't want to hear so much of the vision. I want to know what it actually does.
Cool. We have 2 distinct products. They both complement each other, but they are independent of one another. In conjunction, they solve for the shift in advertising and consumer demands for control over his or her own data. So on the consumer side, straightforward, we have a product called Locker Mail, which is a publicly facing email address for users to filter out all the noise while still being able to benefit from discounts and organizing their shipping notifications and any relevant news.
So it's like an email proxy kind of?
Correct. We try to stay away from the word proxy publicly because not everybody understands it, but yes.
And I could sign up for that right now if I wanted to do.
You can go to lockermail.com and use it today to sign up for Marketecture like I did.
All right. So you're not getting my emails? Are you filtering the weekly newsletters?
Well, let's say, for example, I wanted to filter a certain newsletter by a mention of my company name or my personal name, I could do that.
Cool. Okay. So that's the consumer product, and that's free?
Correct. That is free.
Cool. Check it out. Locker Mail. There's no E in Locker, right? It's L-O-C-K-R.
Oh, that is correct. I guess at this point I should know better. Yes, it's L-O-C-K-R. We couldn't afford the E.
Right. Okay. Pandemic. I know how it is. Okay. And then what's the B2B product?
So the B2B product is called Identity Locker. It is a suite of identity tools that are primarily built to benefit publishers, although it would be the exact same mechanisms for brands and retailers. They just aren't our number one focus right now. What we primarily do is we ensure the validity of an email address at the point of collection. This impacts publishers' top-line revenue as a result of not having a persistent identifier to pass within the bid stream or to use for subscriber marketing or audience development of anything in that regards. We gather consented data directly from the consumer on behalf of that publisher. It integrates seamlessly with any identity solution in the market today. We complement companies like UID2, LiveRamp ATS, or any data clean room. We do not compete with them. We only want publishers to collect usable email addresses, what we refer to as true authentication.
Okay, cool. So basically, you're spending all this work as a publisher getting someone to sign up for your newsletter or create a login or paywall, and then they put in a garbage email address or they put in a throwaway email address.
Yeah, or more recently, they put in an Apple hide my email address.
Right. So what do you do? How does that work when you integrate with a publisher?
So there's a number of different points of integration, the most important one of which is the one you're referring to, which is our email verification API. Long story short, as soon as a visitor of the website types in an email address, it pings our API with that input field, and we verify if it is a usable email address. We do that in a number of different ways. We don't share all of our intricacies, but the easiest way and the most obvious way is looking at the domain. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different domains that represent non-persistent email addresses that are used by tools such as Abind, Mailinator, Cloak, Burner Mail, and all of these, what we refer to as machine-generated email tools. We also look at pattern recognition and inputs. As an example, Ari@iCloud.com might actually be a real email address. Honestly, even Ari's moving company at iCloud.com might be a real email address, but hungrycheese744@iCloud.com based off of pattern recognition may or may not. And we have a few other tricks up our sleeves as well to identify machine-generated emails.
How do you know my side hustle is a moving company operator?
I'm
It's
just
all about the
referring
lead
to
gen.
recent summer.
It's all about the lead gen and moving. That's the key. So what does a publisher do when they get your API response that says this isn't a good email, or this is a good email, but it's machine generated? Isn't it the consumer's choice to give it Apple ID?
Yeah, so it's completely up to the consumer, but it's also completely up to the publisher who they want to permit to gain access in this value exchange that we refer to as the internet for the past 30 years. And so from our perspective, it's very equivalent to publishers that utilize ad block detection. If a publisher utilizes it, they are very used to articulating that value exchange to their visitor, and it's identical in terms of the communication process. Hey, visitor, we see what you're doing. We respect your right, but if you want to access this content, you need to utilize, you either need to turn off that ad blocker or you need to provide a real usable email address, your personal work email, etc.
What's the interaction between the consumer side and the business side? Why do you need to offer locker mail in order to offer the API?
I mean, look, I'll give you the non-political answer here. I'll just be straightforward. If I wanted to build another identity platform for publishers, brands, or retailers, which is perfectly in line with my background and my experience, we could build a very healthy, sustainable B2B SaaS business with decent margins, build up our ARR, and look for exit potential and other growth potential areas. But we see a larger opportunity and a change in the ecosystem to actually incorporate the consumer as a stakeholder. Because, if you listen to anybody talk about the most important participant in the internet, it is the consumer, but I don't see a lot of the other ad tech companies on Marketecture actually having a consumer product.
Right, they don't. So when a consumer goes to a publisher and gets this whatever feedback that they're using a machine-generated email, or using that as lead gen for people to try locker mail.
Lead gen would be a strong approach because we do not require that any publisher promote locker mail to their user or push anybody to locker mail. However, we do offer a single sign-on option for our users to streamline their experience on the internet and also enable them to control their consent and what data they do provision and share with each individual publisher, brand, or retailer.
And when it comes to publishers, there's a big concern about their data and their data ownership. What data rights do you retain in the email addresses that are being validated?
So it depends on your definition of data rights in that question. But for us, we are providing the consumer the tool and the mechanism for them to control their own experience online. We do not own or control or provision access to that data. If a consumer shows up to publisher A and says, yes, I consent, all of that consumer's data is passed on to that publisher and they own it. In our identity locker, we actually support the integration of various other identity solutions out there, and we can pass that data on behalf of the publisher. Or if that publisher wants to push that data to a CDP that they might work with, we also enable that as well. We are just the platform that, facilitates that transaction. I know platform's your favorite word, by the way.
I have a lot of favorite words. Some I can't say on the podcast, but what traction do you have? Can you give any names of publishers that are case studies, or just tell us what sort of traction you have?
We're working towards some public case studies. We can say that on both sides of our business, we see adoption. On the consumer side, we have tens of thousands of users. We're processing millions and millions of emails every single month, and we continue to scale. And on the publisher side, we see great adoption and understanding on behalf of publishers that are focused on first-party data collection, and they're understanding that as a result of testing with us, that 20 some odd % on average of their registration data is actually not usable, regardless of what identity provider they work with thereafter.
Right. Okay, last question. If your company was an animal, what animal would it be?
Man, well, I feel like what we have to do right now is educate the market and scream from the rooftops. So I guess my head immediately just goes to Lion King and the scene on top of the Savannah just preaching.
So lion. Do you know? I'd say about 60% of our interviews say lion, or tiger. But
I'm not unique. I don't
at
know
least
what I
at
can
least you
say.
gave the Lion King, you put the scene out there. It's not just a random lion. It's a
I
king
painted
of
a
lions.
picture, Ari.
You painted a picture. That's what we all appreciate. All the listeners appreciate that. All right, Keith, thank you so much for being our guest. It was a very interesting conversation.
Appreciate you for having me.
Thank you for subscribing to Marketecture. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.